Hello YouTubers and welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha and today I'm going to be looking at The Silence of the Lambs novel. Yes, another book review there for you folks, for you literary types out there. So where are we up to with the Hannibal Lecter chronology? So we're past the events of Red Dragon now, and we're now leaping forward a few years. Hannibal Lecter is still incarcerated at the Baltimore State Prison, and the story, Silence of the Lambs novel, the events start with Jack Crawford, the head of FBI serial killer unit. He recruits Clarice Starling, who is a wet behind the ears, fresh out of training or still in training, to be an FBI profiler. She's assigned with the task of going and interviewing Hannibal Lecter in order to collect information and create a database on the motives of notorious serial killers. At the same time, there's another serial killer on the loose now. This time it's Buffalo Bill, aka James Gum, spelled Jame, and he is a killer who's preying on defenseless, slightly overweight women and murdering them, skinning their hides in order to create a suit made out of women's skin. The obvious inspiration, the real life inspiration for this character was, of course, Ed Gein, who's probably the most influential serial killer in at least in film history, because he also, as well as influencing or inspiring James Gum, the Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, he also inspired Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Norman Bates in Psycho. So, the novel. What have we here? I think it's a great novel. It's Harris has created that rare thing. It's a sequel that's on a par or maybe even superior to the original. I guess I'd say technically it's a better book. It certainly has all the attributes that Red Dragon has, the meticulous research, every scene written to perfection, a great story that builds momentum, and some great showpiece scenes. And every scene, like in all of Harris's work, is all in the right place. It all comes in the perfect 3-act structure, and it's not wholly conventional. It's not, although at its heart it is a police procedural in which the main protagonist goes and tracks down a serial killer, but bringing the other element in of Hannibal Lecter being the boogeyman, the character who, you might call him a villain, but is he really that? Because he does help Clarice Starling on the way. He's more of the mentor figure, in a funny sort of way. Harris has made the Hannibal Lecter character the mentor figure. He's the Obi-Wan Kenobi character, if you like. So that's what makes this feel a very original story. There was a 7-year gap in Harris's writing. Between Red Dragon and Silence. Red Dragon was published in 1981. This came out in 1987. So, as I said before, Harris not the most prolific writer in the world. And I like that about him. You can feel the research. I've said. I feel like I'm repeating myself in these reviews, but it shows in every work that he produces. The research is there on the page. Um, he's researched everything from gender reassignment to the life cycle of Malaysian moths, and it's all there on the page. Um, it never, as a book, it never really quite had me on the edge of my seat in the same way that Red Dragon did. So it doesn't quite. So therefore, I will put Red Dragon down as my personal favourite of the Lecter novels over this. But that's not to take away from what a great work the Silence of the Lambs book is. I mean, you can see why this was picked up straight away and put into development by Hollywood, because it screams to be made into a film, and any filmmaker worth his salt could see that this was the text in this was easily going to translate to a very thoughtful intellectual thriller, and indeed, that's what the filmmakers thought they were making. They were making a thriller. They were surprised when the film at least got dubbed as a horror story. But like Red Dragon, I mean, Harris really pulls no punches with the level of gore and violence in these films. Something that readers in at the time, they probably weren't used to this level of gore, at least on not on this realistic level. I mean, obviously, horror writers like Stephen King and Clive Barker were ingesting their work with this level of gore. But what elevates the work of Thomas Harris above their work is his novels feel that like they take place very much in the real world, and not a fantasy landscape, and so the that's what makes the violence feel all the more shocking. But it's no doubt that the main draw of this novel is the Hannibal Lecter character. Whereas in the first book, he went for a less is more approach with Lecter. You just really get that one crackling scene between him and Graham, and then the rest of the time he's alluded to, and he writes letters to Graham. Here, Harris thought, okay, I have a brilliant creation. I really underutilized him last time, so here he becomes one of the main thrusts of the novel, and you get 2 or 3 interrogation scenes with Hannibal, and then an actual story for him, because I'm sure I'm not spoiling it for many people when I reveal that towards the end of the novel, Lecter escapes in one of those ingeniously clever and horrific escape scenes ever put into literature. But the Lecter character is very much the draw of this. He's re-established early on and alluded to sort of in the first 30 pages. So there's a great excitement when Starling goes to meet Lecter, because it's like coming face to face with the devil when you meet Lecter. And just because what you establish, the backstory's all there, put there in the first 30 pages. And then when he finally appears on page, I mean, each scene that Harris writes is exquisitely written. It's no wonder that they were, dialogue-wise, these scenes were pretty much copied verbatim when they made the film, because the character he comes off the page, he comes alive, the dialogue crackles, and Lecter a big draw for the novel. But as well as Lecter, you also have this really compelling protagonist in Clarice Starling, a far more thoughtful more mature character in a way, even though she's younger than Will Graham. You know, Will Graham was really portrayed as sort of the quintessential tortured, you know, man's got to do what a man's got to do sort of character. Here, Harris is created. Well, in switching the gender roles, he's created a more vulnerable character. So when Clarice Starling goes up against the serial killers in this story, there's a far greater sense of vulnerability simply by virtue of the fact of her being a young woman. You know, not even a full-on FBI agent at this point in her career. She's still technically in training at the academy when the events of the novel take place. It's funny. I heard that there's not a lot of sort of tapes hardly any sort of recordings of Harris out there. There's a few photos here and there, but he never does interviews, Harris. I did actually hear his voice the other day. If you want to hear what he actually sounds like, you can. He does the audio book version of Hannibal, the novel. Not the full version, but there's an abridged version that you can listen to on Audible, and there's a brief snippet of it on YouTube. The reason I'm talking about his voice is because he's very much you know, he sounds like he comes from the same part of America, the American South, as Clarice Starling. And when I heard his voice, I finally realised, okay, if I was to hazard a guess, I'd say that Clarice Starling is probably the closest to Thomas Harris in inspiration. He's probably the character he based most on himself, in that, as Lecter says in the novel, you know what you look like to me? You look like a rube. You can, I'm paraphrasing, but he essentially says you can doll yourself up, but I bet you're not more than one generation away from poor white trash. And that's Clarice Starling's background. You know, she's essentially poor white trash made good. You know, she was obviously like born into a sort of hick rube community in America, but she had a brain, and she was able to sort of through the education system work her way up out into a respectable institution like the FBI. Obviously Harris went another way. He went into journalism and then later on novel writing, but to hear his voice and his accent, I guessed in a previous video that I thought maybe Harris was close to Lecter in real life, at least in his tastes and his intellect. But I've since changed my mind. I think if he's closer to anyone in these novels, it's probably Clarice Starling. Part of Harris's skill is in his ingenious plotting. Not a scene in this is out of place, and they're all written to perfection. There's a great feeling of authenticity. Harris has obviously done extensive research. I think I've covered that already. This is particularly fun to read if you are familiar with the film. I mean, the film, at least plot-wise, it sticks very close to the source material, and it's also and the dialogue is taken in large part from verbatim from the film. There's a few exceptions here and there, and there's, you know, obviously like the few sort of concessions you have to make when adapting a novel. You know, a character's some lines might be have been spoken verbally in the film when in fact they were only thought by characters in the film. But yeah, I'd say if you've never read the book, and you think the film's it's enough that you've read that you've seen the film. I implore anyone to go and read this book, because if you like the film, it'll only make you appreciate it more reading the book. You do get the novel, the story that you know already, but you get this added element when you read the novel of it being told to you. You feel like you're in the hands of a master storyteller when you hear the novel or read the novels being told to you. Oh yes, there's a slip there. Okay, yes, I did listen to the audiobook version. I have read the novel a long time ago, but to save time to reacquaint with myself, I did cheat slightly this time and listen to the audiobook version, which is why I don't have the novel to hand to show you. So yeah, quick confession there. But what's great about it, if you are familiar with the film, is just the greater insight you get into the psychology of the characters. It's fun to find out what the characters were thinking between the lines of dialogue that it's fun to find out the little tidbits of what happened between the scenes that so well, and also it's interesting to see what was left out of the film. There's a subplot with Jack Crawford's wife where he's all about his wife who's dying, that was completely excised from the film, thought of as extraneous, but then later utilised in the Hannibal TV series. So that's really interesting to find out. Yeah. There's not a lot more I can say about this book. It's about as entertaining as literature gets, and I implore anyone to read it. It's a really, really fine read. Really, I mean, it works on every level. It's a great story. It's a really well structured story. Great characters, great dialogue, a real page turner. Not too long, which always gets a thumbs up from me. Just a really, really good book. So that's all I'm going to say for the moment. Join me next time when I'll be finally getting onto the film. The reason I started these Hannibal Lecter reviews is because one of my subscribers asked me to review the film, and I thought, well, if I'm going to review the film, I may as well review all the other films, and that spiraled into doing the books and the TV show as well. And I've said this goes to anybody else watching, if you want a free review, simply subscribe to the channel and get in contact. I'll gladly review anything you want to watch. Anyway, that's all from me for this one. So this I haven't got my vape stick on me at the moment, so I'm going to have to forego the special effects for this time around. But it just remains for me to say, this is me, Big Buddha, signing off, folks, and I shall see you all out there in YouTube land.